This week on the Eldritch Lorecast, Matthew Colville stands in for Dale Kingsmill as we talk about the state of 5e and what the future of the game could look like in a possible 5.5 and 6th edition. All that and more right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 D&D podcast in all the planes. Yes, indeed, we polled all the bards that play in all the taverns, and they all said the Eldritch Lorecast is what they like to listen to get themselves hyped up before a show. My name is Ben Byrne, and I am here, as always, with Shawn and James Haeck. But don't adjust your monitors, don't flee mortals, because we also have Matt Colville filling in for Dale Kingsmill this week. Thank you so much for giving your time, Matt. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
No, of course. We are thrilled to have you. I don't know if it's showing, but we truly are.
I'm lucky to be here.
I do have to ask you, Matt, if you were, this is a question that has come in via email on the podcast from Dave. Dave has asked, if you were designing 5.5 or 6th edition, if you were the Wizards employee tasked with this epic task, what from 5e would you want to fix mechanically and why?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a good sense of what, like, yeah, I would probably just start on the first page and just keep editing and fixing until I got to the end.
Is there anything that jumps out at you?
Like the stuff about 5th edition that bugs me is it's too broad. It's too broad to like it. So the real answer is probably something like, man, does it that paladin ability where everybody within a 10-foot radius gets some ridiculous bonus to all their saving throws is just dumb, right? I as a dungeon master, I was like, and the player who had it was like, I feel like I'm getting away with something, right? They felt like this is, and that's, in my opinion, that's when you really know there's something wrong, is when the player who's benefiting from it feels like, this is too good. I think this is too good. And then when you go online and you talk about that stuff, people say, well, it's all about positioning, right? And then the monsters just have to make sure that the heroes are not. And I'm like, yeah, but is 5th edition a game about positioning? Wasn't that the edition you threw out? Right? Did you give your monsters lots of abilities that make it so it's easy for me as a dungeon master to kind of deal with this crazy, insane saving throw bonus? No. So that's the kind of thing, like on a low level, there's 1 or 2 abilities like that. We saw that there wasn't a good pet class in 5th edition. And so we just made one, right? But at a high level, my problems with 5th edition, which by the way, I think are the same problems lots of people are having right now. And it's a fine edition of D&D. It's a fantastic edition. We all played it for years without any complaints, but now it's starting to show its age. And the thing that I see as a problem is that it is trying to do everything you can do with D&D. And as a result, I don't think it's doing any of it like at an A+ level. Right. Okay. Like there's a lot of different flavors of Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of different ways you can play this game. And it's kind of trying to have its cake and eat it too. And in my experience, that never really works well.
I think that's a really interesting point to bring up because 8 years ago when 5th edition came out, that's kind of exactly the edition of D&D we needed because, a lot of goodwill had been burnt with 4th edition and Pathfinder was claiming the market. And now with D&D as the clear top dog again, with movies coming out and, the Kickstarters breaching millions of dollars, stuff like that. Now people, I think, really have the freedom to go into their own little niche and be really well supported for it.
Yeah, I mean, they've done a good job of doing what they need to do with the brand, right? Which is to kind of support it and make it broadly appealing to the maximum number of people, and that's fine. But that I don't know of the for dungeon masters, I don't know who that serves, right? That's great for the brand, right? But I don't own the brand. I'm a DM, and the kinds of games that I want to run, and there's a couple different kinds of games I like running. I like running heroic fantasy where we're all heroes trying to save the world, but I think 4th edition is better for that. I like dungeon crawling where it's survival horror, and just going into the dungeon is a terrifying experience, and you're probably not going to live. And if you do, it's a big deal. And only then do you bother naming your character, right? And I think there are earlier editions of D&D that are way better than that. So I think you're right. I think they've done a remarkable job of kind of serving the maximum number of people. That's their job. It's their brand. But as a dungeon master, it doesn't help me a lot.
we get to pat ourselves on the back here a little bit as third-party publishers through Ghostfire and MCDM, because we aren't beholden to the brand. We can kind of do whatever the hell we want to.
Yep. And that's why every once in a while in like one of my live streams, somebody will say, why didn't Wizards of the Coast release a product like this? Or why doesn't Wizards of the Coast why did you guys have to do it? And I'm like, I don't think you folks understand how the guys in Seattle think, at least the people in charge, right? Their attitude is like, this is why we made the OGL, because a product like this would never be popular for us. It wouldn't be worth it. The bang for buck wouldn't be worth it, right? So let these smaller companies go and spin their little boutique fantasies, and they'll attract some audience. But as far as the people in Seattle are concerned, all we're doing is increasing the value of their brand, right? And so they're perfectly happy to see companies like ours making this kind of content.
Yeah, something I don't think that's been fixed in any edition is that I think it's said that D&D is a resource management game with a story problem, or a story game with a resource management problem. And that making those two things work on the same level is impossible. If I write an adventure and I hand it out or sell it, and some people run it and they say, this was way too easy. When another group runs it and they said, this was way too hard. Generally, what the issue is one DM ran it in a way that the characters got no rest. And then this other DM ran it in a way where the characters got a rest after every combat. So until the game tells us exactly how to move those dials, it's always going to be an issue. And we can work around it, but it's easier if the game tells you and shows you and has the rules in place to facilitate that kind of play.
Let me ask you a question. If the game, like if depending on what it is we're trying to model, like I think most people when they discover the game in this day and age, they're imagining things like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or Stranger Things or whatever. Why do we have rests? Like, do the Avengers have to stop in the middle of fighting Ultron and say, you need to give us 10 minutes so we can take a break? Right. So these are the questions that I think people should be asking is why do we accept these things that have been in the game for 50 years? Do they actually make sense for because you can do all kinds of resource management, like without having to build rests after X number of encounters into your game.
It's even more complicated by the way we play now as opposed to how the game was played back in 1978. In 1978, I think the average session probably ran 12 hours or something crazy. It was long. You would sit down for the weekend and play. Whereas now everyone is like, I have an hour, let's play. Yeah. And then you have a natural resting place for the story, for the game. But if all your resources come back at that point, then so it's not just the game we have to figure out, it's how the game is played and how it's consumed that we need to worry about as game developers. As consumers, we just want it to work the way it's supposed to.
I think that those early like the 70s and the early 80s, I think the reason people played 12 hours a day was because that edition of the game was much more focused on a dopamine loop than the modern edition of the game. Like you wanted to clear out another room because in that other room were more monsters and more treasure, and you literally got XP for gold. Every time you found a new gold piece, you were closer to leveling up. So that created this kind of very, iPhone game style experience where we as players just wanted to keep doing it. We just wanted to keep going. And I don't think the modern game really rewards that kind of behavior. And so as a result, people don't play it the same way. There are lots of games that people play in this day and age. Like I lost most of my friends to Elden Ring, right? And the only reason they stopped was because they had to go to work, right? So it's like that attitude, that style of play still exists, right? It's just that the modern edition of the game doesn't really. I know, right? The fools,
slackers.
Yeah. It's actually the exact same thing as Shawn. When this is especially relevant when I was designing adventures for Critical Role, because you'll see this problem in the Critical Role live plays is that they will tend to have one encounter that is big and stacked and full of bad guys, and it's a climactic encounter, and that's more or less the only encounter of note that happens in a given story mini arc. Every now and then, Mercer has a dungeon crawling streak in him that I think he kind of has to suppress a little bit for the live stream because it doesn't suit the format.
I mean,
when you're playing, no, go ahead.
I, as somebody who has done the streaming thing, I think that there's, I think that it's just as likely that Matt did that, right? I did that, and now this is, I don't want to make that one album over and over and over again. I made that album, and so I think that style of play, by the way, of one big encounter per, like a session equals a plot point equals an encounter, right? That makes a lot of sense to me. That's a real easy sell. Anyway, sorry. Continue.
Yeah. Oh no. I was running sessions like that before I ever watched Critical Role, just because I wanted my game sessions to feel like a chapter of a book, and you don't have 5, garbage little encounters in a chapter. You want to get to the good stuff. My players wanted to get to the good stuff, and
this game doesn't make any sense. This game doesn't make any goddamn sense. This game we're playing doesn't make any sense, right? Because everything you're saying makes perfect sense to me. But then go look at the list of equipment in the player's handbook. It's like, what is that list of equipment doing in a game that has this kind of cinematic, right, approach to it? Because what you're talking about is very cinematic gameplay, right? You're talking about. Sorry, go ahead.
Wait. Maybe I want to change my answer. I've talked about this in the podcast before. Yeah. Equipment. I would change the equipment. I would change it to very much simplified weapon types and oust all of this sort of finicky nonsense about, the mace is a D8, but the Morningstar is a D6. No, there's really no difference between the two of them. It's either make it simple or make it really, really complex. And like Matt, you were talking about, this middle ground doesn't suit me very well.
Yeah.
I just want to actually, for the record, way the 5e playtest. Oh, go ahead, Shawn.
No, keep going, James.
Okay. Well, the thing that the 5e playtest promised, and I don't feel like a promise was broken, but it was certainly like rolled back to a new approach, is that it was going to be a very modular game, 5th edition. There's going to be a kind of sleek, streamlined core and a lot of different plug-ons that you could do to modify your game to do it exactly how you want it. And there's a million reasons why that isn't exactly tenable, especially as a business model. But boy, is that my sort of pie in the sky dream. I would love a sleek, simplified 5e core and then a bunch of different stuff that I could plug into.
I think I was listening to Mastering Dungeons the other day, actually, the other number one D&D podcast in all the planes. And this might have been, I can't remember whether it was you or Teos, Shawn, that basically seemed to suggest what would be really cool is a starter kit that basically was almost like basic D&D. Like you had like basic 6th and then like advanced 6th, and the first, the basic 6th was the first 5 levels, but it also taught you like character creation, and you went and you kind of formed your character through playing the game and adventuring rather than having this hour-long form fill out that you need to do. Basically, your character's birth certificate that you need to write before they can go out and start adventuring. And I just thought that was, like a tutorial for a video game. That's how I think the game gets taught a lot, is like it's a tutorial for a video game, but with fully fleshed out characters. What if it was like, all right, now we're going to get into combat. You see a rack of weapons. Which one do you grab? And then that becomes their like starting equipment or, whatever it happens to be as each part of the game is introduced. And then you plug in more and more of those modules. Just very quickly, James, I think the reason 5e isn't more modular is because of things we discussed where maybe it was sort of meant to be, with feats being optional and flanking being optional and all these optional rules that very often are assumed by players who come to the table and just go, oh, I want to take a feat at first level. That's fine, right? Like I can do that. Feats are in this.
Yeah, but then you get stuff like there's an entire class in 5th edition that is designed for a pillar of play that got cut. Right. So so we got a ranger who's like, well, I can mark people. I do an extra D8 when I shoot them with an arrow, right? I've got a cool bear, but they don't really have a robust role in compared to some of the other classes.
Sure.
So yeah, you can do some of those things with optional rules, but there was a more robust version of this game that was in the playtest.
It was winnowed down to be more streamlined, and then because of no modules to beef it back up again, suddenly there's a void. Yeah, I don't really know anything about the internal thinking of the dev team, so I can't really even model like that process. But I'll tell you that, like, I think that for me, a better, I would rather see different games using the same core rule set. And by core rule set, I mean you roll a d20, you add a number, you compare it to a target number,
As long as that's true, and maybe you keep the basic 6 stats, but you could probably change 1 or 2 of them. But other than that, keep the same core rule set and just do different games with them. Do you want an explicitly heroic fantasy Fellowship of the Ring? We're not greedy. We're just trying to save the world. We don't really care about magic items. Well, then here's the product for that. Do you want more kind of like survival horror dungeon crawling? Well, here's a product for that.
A lot of like third party and non D&D games.
Yep.
I'm thinking of, I'm not going to remember the name of it. There's an Australian tabletop RPG game that maybe the chat can help me out with, but I know that they basically have like, here's the pirate book, here's the space book, here's the dark fantasy book. And so it's the same rule set, but it is split across not just different settings, but different genres that I assume kind of changes up the some of the, adds rules for firearms or takes them away or sailing combat or whatever it happens to be. I will try and Google that in the meanwhile so I can remember its name. Very quickly, speaking of names and things, quick bit of housekeeping of Eldritch Lorecast news, if you will. The Eldritch Lorecast is graduating. It's getting its diploma. It's finishing on the Ghostfire Gaming YouTube channel, and it is moving across to its own YouTube channel where you should be watching this if you're watching this on YouTube. I think the new channel is going to be called Ghostfire Podcasts or Ghostfire Lorecasts. If you search Ghostfire and Lorecast, you'll undoubtedly find it. If you have found it, if you are watching us right now on YouTube in our little boxes, subscribe and hit that bell icon. Show the Eldritch Lorecast that you are here for the long run, because we are. We'll be here every week, and it will help kind of kickstart that new channel so that the Lorecast gets out to more people. So keep an eye out for that. If you're watching on Twitch, the channel isn't up yet, but it'll basically go up a couple of hours before the episode drops in its usual time at 2 a.m. Thursday night Australia time. I have no idea what that is US time, so you work it out. I could think about it, but I'm not gonna, because
I wonder, is it like Fahrenheit and Celsius where there's some time of day of the year where it's the same in Australia? It feels like it should be. That every once in a while we should get in sync and then go out of sync. And anyway.
Well, basically, I know that Shawn's time is if you take my time back 2 hours and then flip the AM to the PM, and that's basically how I work it out now. Sean's nodding, which I assume means you do the same thing. You just think 2 hours forward and
it's just like converting Fahrenheit to Celsius. Right.
Great, perfect. I am looking forward to daylight savings though, when it ends for you and starts for us, because then the Lorecast will record, I think, at 11 a.m. our time instead of 9 a.m. So I'll be more awake. I will have had time to have a coffee. Cool. All right.
What silliness.
Speaking of silliness, let's jump back into more news, Wizards news. I'm just going to drop a whole bunch of things. I have a box full of ideas and bits of news, and I'm just going to pour them out on the table for you three to sort of pass through. There's probably going to be a lot of wild speculation, but that's part of the fun.
That's the best kind of speculation.
Exactly. August 18th. August 18th is Wizards Presents, which looks like it's their new Nintendo Direct style address where they're going to be dropping news, probably a bit of Magic the Gathering as well as D&D. A lot of folks have pointed out that this is not D&D Direct. I think the last one was called earlier in the year. This is Wizards Presents. But Ray Winninger, once again on Twitter, has been teasing something big that has been teased for years is going to be presented in this, which I assume has to do with D&D.
Spelljammer confirmed.
I mean, this is coming like 2 days after Spelljammer's release. So it's kind of like, all right, here's Spelljammer. Great. Have fun with that. By the by, here's this new thing that's coming out. What do we think? Is this an adventure book for later in the year or maybe something coming next year? Is this a 5.5? Probably not, but sort of announcement maybe. What do we think?
Oh, well, surely it has to be Baldur's Gate 4 already. But I have a hunch that if Ray is making an announcement like this, I don't think it's a D&D book, because we've actually gone through a lot of the stuff that's been promised and teased so far. I remember it must have been a year ago or so, Ray was talking about all sorts of new settings coming back, including 2 that were, older settings that were being revived. And we've seen those. Spelljammer and Dragonlance have both been announced to have revivals in 5e. Those are the two he was talking about. And unless we want to go digging into some more esoteric classic D&D stuff like Dark Sun or Heaven Forfend Birthright or something like that, we won't be seeing anything for the RPG. I suspect that this has something to do with the video game studio that Wizards acquired off in Texas or wherever it is, and they have their hands full making the next big shiny thing.
Gotcha. Okay, that would make a lot of sense. Because I just in even saying it in the presentation of this news, I got all excited and I was like, 5e, 5.5, 5.5, is that what we're like? Are we ready to talk about that yet? And then went back and read some of the news from late last year, and they're like 5.5 is coming in 2024, and then after that, maybe we'll look at a 6th edition. And I was like, okay, it feels like they might have jumped the gun a little bit on that, because now I feel like I'm jumping the gun every time there's a tease of news, and I'm like, all right, I'm ready. Let's do this. 5.5, let's go. Shawn, what do you think? What are you thinking this will be? Do you agree with James?
It's as possible as anything else. The great thing about not being a contractor for Wizards anymore is that I can talk about what I don't know, which is quite a bit. But I mean, the problem with Ray's statement of things we've been teasing for years is that years means different things to different people, right? Years to you, Ben, is probably 2 years. Years to me is 20 years. So, right? It's like, oh, we're getting digital dice? If I were to have two guesses, if it's D&D product related, it might be Planescape, because we've seen in the Unearthed Arcana there have been some planar type articles. But my guess would be information on a virtual tabletop that Wizards is going to do.
Right.
With their acquisition of D&D Beyond and something like that. That's something that they've been promising since the start of 4th edition. Yeah. Even having vaporware that they were showing off at Winter Fantasy back in 2012. So yeah, that would be my guess.
That would be a very interesting guess, because my understanding is, and the three of you can correct me because I was not there for 4E, was that basically what's happening now with the acquisition of D&D Beyond, and if you're correct, a virtual tabletop on its way, it's kind of what they tried to do at the start of 4E, but was kind of rejected by the fan base because it didn't work very well and there were problems with it. And it reminded me very much, please correct me in a moment, it reminded me very much of the Xbox One launch, where it was like, hey, here's all this like future stuff that you're not ready for yet, and the fan base were like, no. As a youngin', thank you, Shawn. Nobody's made a joke about me being young since I turned 30, so I appreciate that. Matthew, please correct me.
So the 4th edition was designed from the ground up to be used with a virtual tabletop. And they went and they hired a team of ex-Microsoft people to design that software. And so they had in their own internal development, which was going to be a virtual tabletop designed to be used with 4th edition, which was designed to be used with a VTT. We've never seen that. Right, all the VTTs online, even like James Introcaso, who's a lead designer at MCDM, he designed Burn Bright for Roll20, but Roll20 was not designed for Burn Bright. Right, we don't have any examples in the marketplace of a VTT that was explicitly designed for this one RPG, and that RPG was designed to be used with the VTT. But the problem was the dude they put in charge of that project killed his family and then killed himself, and that project was canceled.
Yes, I do remember reading that.
So that's the reason that there was no release that disappointed everybody. If anything, the thing that was disappointing was there was no release. We got the TTRPG, but we didn't get the VTT. And then some number of years later, they published what they had, which was very kind of not polished and not finished, obviously. And they had a lot of really, really robust online tools that my group and I, including people that are basically boomers in my group, people who are much older than me and who consider themselves somewhat technophobes, they completely loved these tools. It gave them an enormous amount of power as dungeon masters, and it let them do things on the fly improvisationally that they'd never been able to do before. And 5th edition doesn't have any of those tools. I sort of assumes that sooner or later we're going to see the VTT announcement from Wizards of the Coast, which means, by the way, if you're a company like MCDM and you make third-party content, the clock is ticking because your audience is only going to go down. because your content's not going to be on unless they do something remarkable, like they go the Steam route, which would surprise the hell out of me, but they could do it, right? Where anybody, third-party companies are free to publish their stuff there without like draconian, audible terms where we take 70%, in which case no one would ever do it. That's possible.
DM's Guild's already close.
It seems unlikely to me, but it would make me very happy if they did that. So my base assumption is it's going to be like D&D Beyond, where you can't get third-party content on there. You just can't do it. Yeah. And the number of people using the VTT, that's only going to go up. Right. And the number of people who play in person in a completely analog environment and don't have, the VTT's character builder on their phone and and the Dungeon Master doesn't use that number of people is only going to go down because they have the power to make a VTT that's really, really useful. Right. And that has a bunch of tools built into it that everybody would want to use. And if they do that, then unless you've got your own VTT, your audience is, I think, only going to dwindle. The clock is ticking.
What's the and this is an improvised question that I'm throwing out there. What is the motivation for Wizards to do a Steam-like solution as opposed to not? Because you mentioned earlier, Matt, how the part of the popularity, and maybe it's not tied to the popularity of 5e, but part of the offering of 5e, the fact that 5e offers folks so much, is third-party publishers kind of coming out and filling the gaps that Wizards can't. And that creates a lot of engagement, I think, from the audience on behalf of the system, if not the company. What is what winning motivation is there over having complete control of the system and complete control of the product and opening it up for third parties to be able to contribute it to potentially bring in more audience? Which side of that would you guess Wizards would land on?
The thing is, there are two wolves inside every company like this, right? There's the one wolf who's like, look, making adventures does not make a lot of money for us. Wizards of the Coast is an expensive team, right? And so there's always going to be content that you can imagine for 5th edition that would find an audience, but that just isn't worth the development time for Wizards of the Coast. So for that wolf, for that faction inside the company, the OGL is a huge boon. It allows Wizards of the Coast to make the stuff that they think needs to be made, and everything else that they think, well, this is, I'm sure some people would use this, but is it going to do, 100,000 units? Well, then no, let a third party company handle that. So that's one argument in favor of doing the Steam approach. But then there's always going to be somebody, usually at the C level, and somebody in the C-suite who's going to see a project like Strongholds and Followers or Flea Mortals and go, I don't understand. Why did we let them make $2 million on their Kickstarter? We want that. We want that money. So no, you can't do that. Right. And it's literally just down to who's in charge today and how long are they in charge for? And when they leave, there'll be a new vice president or CEO or whatever. And these attitudes and approaches, they rarely last longer than the tenure of the people who are charging them, pushing them forward.
There's a comment in chat saying that Hasbro owned D&D from 3rd edition till now, and all those editions have the OGL. That's not entirely true. 4th edition had no OGL. And the story of, why 3rd had one, why 4th didn't, and why 5th has one again is a very interesting one. Namely, that conflict that, Matt, you were talking about played out in real time within Wizards. The 3rd edition OGL was, all editorialized and say wildly successful. It certainly created a lot of products, and it also eventually led to a third-party glut of stuff that was just kind of filling shelf space at friendly local game stores. And between that glut and that sort of feeling at Hasbro that like we were losing out on money, which Pathfinder contributed immensely to, as the big D&D pantser that followed when 4th edition came. 4th edition's open license was incredibly restrictive. And so I think it's frankly a miracle that 5th edition has an OGL at all. And because D&D is top dog again, I don't think we'll see one for a future edition. I think the only reason why 5th edition got an OGL is because it was building itself back up. It had to kind of recover a lot of good faith that 4th edition had, unintentionally frittered away.
Yeah, I think that the story and history of the 3rd edition OGL, I think there's a lot of received wisdom there. The goal of the OGL, which I just was talking about, was the idea that, okay, now we don't have to make adventures anymore, because you have to have adventures for your RPG, but they're super not profitable because only dungeon masters buy them, and only some dungeon masters, right? But go look at Wizards of the Coast's slate for those years, 2000 to 2000, whatever, right? They made a load of adventures. And they did it because they just didn't think the quality of the third-party adventures was that good. Look at a book like the Draconomicon.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they came out with this gorgeous hardcover book that literally had everything you could ever want that was related to dragons in one book. And the utility value of that book was through the roof. I was a dungeon master and I was like, damn, that they knocked it out of the park. This is the only dragon book you need. And there's literally nothing in that book that a third party could not have done. The OGL makes everything in that book possible for another company. So where was it? Right. So that's part of I don't actually think there was ever demand in the third edition era. I don't think there was demand for third party content. Wizards of the Coast was already putting out more. I mean, compared the third edition slate of releases to the fifth edition slate, they were putting out orders of magnitude more content, official content, than any one group of players could ever use. So going into a game store, you had one experience, right? Which was, damn, there's a lot of third-party content out here. But you look at sales, and a lot of those companies aren't around anymore, right? And some of them were not. Some of them were not D&D companies. They just got into the D&D business because they saw it as kind of a necessity. And I know at least one of those companies almost didn't survive that. They ended up with so much product in the channel, and then it didn't sell. And they were like, okay, now what? Anyway.
Shawn, I see a lot of sort of like nodding. I have James and Shawn to my right-hand side, one on top of the other in the windows.
We're all in a different little break.
Well, I just see, as you're talking about, just the both of them, like their heads like nodding almost in unison. Shawn, I take that you concur largely.
Yeah. I mean, everything that's said here by James and by Matt are wisdom that you should hang on to, right? Because it's, as sad as it is for people who are playing the game and this is your hobby, business is what drives what's produced and business choices. And what the one thing I'm hopeful of for D&D going forward is that Wizards of the Coast will succeed so well with things like movies and things like TV shows and these other deals that they will relent a bit on the game publishing side of things and not worry so much about profit, and maybe have an OGL to let some of these smaller fish swim in the pond. However, as Matt said, when you have a C in front of your title, it's all about that bottom line. It's all about getting every dime you can from what you're making. And so I could see them allowing people to use their their virtual tabletop, or their online store, but there's the small 50% fee that you're going to end up paying.
Yeah, sure.
And that's, I mean, it's sad, but that's probably the reality. If there is something like that, that's probably the direction we're moving in.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, non-OGL titles coming from Ghostfire.
Wow.
Here's another interesting thing is I don't know how many people, including small, really, really small publishers, let's say, some of whom might be in this chat. I don't know how many of them understand what the OGL is actually for. Like, Wizards of the Coast does not own the idea of armor class or D20s or rolling to hit. They don't own the idea of strength intelligence decks. They don't own druids. They don't own any of that stuff, right? The reason you want the OGL is because the OGL gives you access to their IP. Right. And if you don't want that, you don't need it. You can just do your own thing.
Well, that's the difference between, like DM's Guild, which gives you access to mind flayers and stuff like that, as opposed to the OGL, which gives you access to, being able to talk about the way they've built their specific classes, if you want to make a subclass for them or not. I guess the attraction for a third party publisher, and I think that I don't know how popular Pathfinder is these days, or Pathfinder 2E in actuality, but my impression is not as popular as they'd like if they're now publishing 5E content themselves, is that you get access to the audience that has already purchased the the 5th
Sure.
edition Player's Handbook, the 5th edition DMG and Monster Manual, and they're looking for other content, and they're like, oh, well, this Drakenheim thing seems pretty cool. I want to run that adventure, and I already know how to play the game because, I've already invested so far into it. So it's sort of access to Wizards' brand recognition and fan base, an audience that you're sort of buying into there. We've talked, this might be a bit of a weird segue, I'm not sure. We've talked a little bit about, the state of what 3.5 was in when they were just releasing book after book after book. And I'm curious, it obviously doesn't sound like it's at that stage with 5th edition yet, but with them doing like 2 big Nintendo Direct style announcements in the year now, and we've got Spelljammer coming out this year, and we've got Dragonlance later in the year, and they seem to be possibly teasing Planescape at some point, and they just seem to be throwing like everything that's left in the vault, getting it out of the vault and just making a book for it for before 5e comes to a close. I also did a quick count of like the number of releases a year, and at the start of 5e it was like kind of 3 books, maybe 4 books a year, and now we're up to like 5 to 7 books a year, whether it's an adventure book, a supplement book, or whatever it happens to be. And the other thing about these things are that they, like Spelljammer, in my mind, doesn't necessarily mesh with Dragonlance. It's not like you can use these things together. They're technically compatible, but they don't. I'm sure there's many. I assume Dragonlance without knowing anything about it, and I see that James and Shawn are laughing.
Say the phrase "crin space" to scare a Dragonlance fan.
I guess boiling it down to a singular question, do we feel like we're starting to get there with 5e, where 5e is starting to bloat? There's just a lot of like content out there now. It's hard to know where to start if you're a beginner beyond just the Player's Handbook. Do you need Tash's cauldron of everything? And seeing sort of bits and pieces forgotten about 5e, whether it's the exploration pillar or whether it's the whatever it happens to be. Where do we feel the state of 5e is at the moment, if that constitutes a question?
Well, you compare it to 3rd edition, and the state of its bloat is absolutely minimal. We're practically 10 years into this thing, and by year 2, I think 3rd edition had published more books. And so by that metric, why there's no bloat at all. But I do think there is a sort of degree of impenetrability that is growing, and that's honestly small potatoes compared to the feeling of, oh, it's old news. I don't know how new D&D fans are feeling, but I feel like there's this sense in the D&D communities that I'm a part of that, yeah, we all know 5e. That's the kind of old standby. What else new and fresh is coming along? And, Wizards is trying to capitalize on that as best they can.
Yeah.
And new starter sets are coming out, like the new one that just that we talked about last week. I think that's the sort of let's combat this feeling of bloat or old hattishness, and like, here's the new thing, it's all you need. Go check out this one thing.
I mean, how compelled do you feel at your game tables to incorporate the new things that come out from Wizards in terms, like, I use Tash's as an example because that was a supplement that kind of snuck out on me a little bit. And suddenly everybody at my game tables was coming in like, I want to play this and I want to play that. And I was, for the first time in a little while, because it had been a while since Xanathar's, I was like, I have no idea what that is. I have no idea how that works. And then you've got people coming in going, I want to play a rabbit folk from, the Witchlight, or you have, just coming at you from like every angle. How I don't know if pressure's the right word, but how compelled do you feel to include all of this growing kind of level of supplements? Or do you prefer to just pick and choose the ones you're like, this one, that one, and that's how we're going to create a concise tone for our game?
I think one of the to answer your question obliquely, it's in 3rd edition, everything you bought was a book. Now, like with my players, they don't buy Tasha's and they don't buy Monsters of the Multiverse. They go on to D&D Beyond, and it's already there. It's not like they're flipping through the books on the shelf. So in that sort of, in the way that content is delivered to a lot of people now, it might not feel like bloat because it's not a bookshelf full of books. it's bits on your computer that you don't even notice, except, in this drop down where I can choose a race, now there's 3 extra spaces. So as mostly a DM, I don't need all these books, but the players just naturally gravitate towards something that's new, and as they're looking at it on their phone or on their tablet or on their computer screen.
My players are all video game developers, and what they know about D&D is what I tell them. So they have no idea what the Seattle company is working on or doing or what they've released in general. And in fact, the problem is it's so interesting for me as a dungeon master, because I will often just, we killed this black dragon. And I'm like, listen, if you can harvest its brain, you can make potions of dragon control. And if you can preserve enough of its blood, you can make arrows of dragon slaying. And the player's like, oh, that's cool as shit. And then sometime in the next week, they come to me and they go, I couldn't find that rule anywhere. Right. Because they don't know. They just assume that the stuff that I don't, my players by and large, when they think about D&D, they're thinking about this game that we are playing together at the table and what happened last week and what they're going to do next week and stuff like that.
Sure.
They're not really, and I realize that's somewhat unusual. I mean, when I was, in my 20s and 30s, when I had, my gaming group was only one of us, me, was the professional game developer. There were a couple people that were paying attention to the hobby outside of the table, but not my current group.
Gotcha. That's for that very reason. I much prefer introducing new players to the game rather than old players or veteran
I love
players to the
introducing new
game.
people to the game.
Yeah,
it's one of my favorite things to do.
Because you can.
I think that
in fact, you've sort of built a career.
I mean, that's true. I mean, I guess that's a good point. I was like, when I started, the crazy thing for me was going from working in tabletop, because I started at a really tiny company called Last Unicorn Games, and eventually I ended up Wizards of the Coast, but then I jumped ship and worked in video games. And the thing that blew my mind, which was not obvious to me from the outside, was that only a very tiny percentage of video game developers know anything about any tabletop games. They are not automatically, what their experience was, I had a Nintendo when I was a kid, or a Sega Genesis, or a PS2, or whatever. And that was their road into professional game development. And it took the old grognard coming in saying, hey, we should get together and play, whatever, Axis and Allies, Talisman, D&D. And so I love, these are people that are like, they had never done anything analogically at the table since they played Risk or Monopoly when they were 9, right? And so it's a huge amount that's something I get a huge amount of juice out of. I think the release schedule for 5th edition is kind of brilliant, right? And I'm not sure if there are a lot of people that talk about this, because they know the folks in charge over there. And I'd be curious to know whether or not this is a brand thing or whether it's a dev team thing, and whether these two groups agree. But whoever's in charge, I think they've done a really good job of identifying the fact that players have a story. The player goes through a narrative, right? And that story has a beginning, a middle, and an end for most players, right? It's not forever. The number of people out there who started playing D&D when they were 15 and still play every week when they're in their 60s, very few, right? So the release schedule of D&D is all about that story, right? There was a certain time when everyone was playing Curse of Strahd, and that was the conversation. And it wasn't like AD&D, where there was never a time in AD in the 80s where everyone was all playing one of anything. No way. There were a million different adventures, different levels. There were basic D&D adventures, there were AD&D adventures, and so your group's path through the I am a consumer and hobbyist narrative was completely unique and idiosyncratic, right? And I'm not sure that's good for the brand. I'm not even sure that's good for the hobby. It was a fun thing to participate in. But if we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, not just as an industry, but also as a hobby, it benefits the hobby that we're all telling the same stories. And that's pretty soon there's going to be a big Planescape book maybe not Planescape. What's the Spelljammer one? I don't know if it's available now. I know they announced it and there are the books, but pretty soon you can be able to buy those books. And a big chunk of the audience, that's the story they're going to be on. And for some people, that's going to be their first experience with the game, is playing this new thing. And there's always, and whenever season 5 of Stranger Things drops, there's going to be a new big hardcover thing that all the new players will be able to get into. And that'll be the thing everyone is doing. And the old stuff, like, does anybody still run or think about that first Dragon adventure? What was that? It wasn't Dragon
Heart of
Heist,
the Dragon Queen.
Does anybody think of? Yeah, exactly. Is that relevant to anybody now? I don't think it is, right? So but for the people who that was when they started, that was hugely relevant to their experience. But they're not at that part of the journey anymore.
Yeah.
They're now at the part of the journey. Probably if you started back then, your story is now, I don't really use the Wizards of the Coast stuff. I went through the ringer on a couple of their adventures, and now my DM just basically does it themselves. And Wizards of the Coast would be like, good. That's how it should work, right? And at some point they'll release some cool thing that those people will grab and hang on to. But yeah, like, you know, those players who have a dungeon master where the dungeon master is doing it themselves now anyway, they don't need the adventures anymore. Some of those dungeon masters are going to buy these new monster manuals because they want new monsters, right? That's what I do when I run, and I'm like, look, the monsters in the monster manual, I've been running these monsters now for 30 years. I'm like, let me see what's in the new book. And I'm like, ooh, what the hell is this big squid looking weird column of eyeballs and tentacles? I'm going to take that and stick it in my game because my players have no experience with this. So just fighting goblins can be a surprise to them. But I've been doing this for a while, and I also like to be surprised. And so even somebody like me who is very far along in their story with this game, I still get value out of the new products. So that, to me, I have a huge amount of respect for those guys. Their product line is, I'm not sure it can be improved upon.
I heard one of the D&D developers say in an interview, I don't remember if it was Jeremy Crawford or Chris Perkins or who it was, but they said that their release schedule was inspired by Magic the Gathering. Magic has 4 big set releases every year or something like that. I don't play Magic. And whenever a new set release happens, you know, there's a pre-release event. Everyone flocks to their game store. There's a huge community sort of presence there. And they really wanted to gather that same energy with D&D. And
that's why we saw D&D live, right? And the streams and the stream of many eyes and you know, all of those things. Every year they'd go to LA and they'd make a big production of it. And it was exactly for the reason that James and Matt are talking about, is we want everyone to be telling the same story at the same time and get excited and tweet about it and Instagram about it and do all of that. And that's what they were very great at doing.
I honestly think that if what you want out of the Seattle company is not what they're doing, then that's on you. It's time for you to make the stuff that you believe in, right? And be like, look, it's not Wizards of the Coast job to make literally every potential D&D player happy, right? They are the custodians of the brand, and I think they're doing a pretty good job with it. And the whole point of D&D is that if you want to get off the bus, they've already given you all the tools to build your own bus. And just go, and I think it's a natural, by the way, Ray Winninger came up early in this, and I do not know Ray. I don't think I've ever met that dude. However, Ray was the guy behind a game called Underworld, an RPG that came out in the 90s that was incredibly cool and forward looking and had amazing art. I think it was like basically the Transmetropolitan RPG. I could be wrong. But yeah, so I have a huge amount of respect for that dude. Check out his OG 90s game, Underworld.
You know, Wizards was really ramping up to kind of do every year something bigger than the year they'd done before when it came to that community event. We saw it first with Tomb of Annihilation. Well, actually, we saw it back in Storm King's Thunder. A little comic shop called Meltdown Comics in LA had the big Storm King's Thunder launch. Then in Seattle, there was a huge streaming event for Tomb of Annihilation. Then back in LA, in Hollywood, there was the Waterdeep event, and then the Avernus event. And the year after that was the pandemic.
Right.
And so we are seeing them kind of doing their best to do things like D&D Celebration or D&D Direct and continue that spirit. But I can tell, like, deep in my bones that someone is incredibly frustrated from a marketing standpoint that their ability to build higher and higher was just stabbed by the inability to gather in person.
I mean, that's the power of the VTT.
And they were planning something. They were planning something even bigger for LA when COVID struck.
I think I recall Greg Tito reaching out to me and me being, and I think I had said, yeah, well, let me know when you're firmer on the dates and stuff. And then obviously it was January, February, March of 2020, and everybody's world changed.
Shawn, I knew there were some secrets you were still hiding from us. I knew there was something more trapped away in there.
Yeah, I was like, do I ask about it?
This is the power of the VTT, right? Like, I don't think the normal D&D consumer really understands the issue here, and nor should they, frankly, because they're not the head of a giant company in Seattle. But there's always been, and there always will be, I think, way more people that want to play D&D than no other people IRL that want to play, right? And so the VTT is what would allow Dungeons and Dragons to just explode to a degree that I don't think we've seen yet. And all COVID, I cannot imagine any scenario under which COVID happens, and it doesn't accelerate that process internally. And they're like, you know what? If we had released our own VTT just for D&D in 2019, this wouldn't be a problem. In fact, it would be good for the business because everybody would be using the VTT now.
And they do offer virtual D&D weekends every month. It's run through Bald Man Games. You can go to the Yawning Portal on the D&D website, and they run several sessions, new games for beginners. They run them on Fantasy Grounds and Roll20, as well as just through Discord. So if you are looking to play and you don't have a group or you want to learn, I strongly suggest that, because it is a great way to at least see the game and see a virtual tabletop in action to see if it's for you.
That's another thing I hadn't thought about.
I do feel some surprise.
Sorry, James, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just going to say that Yawning Portal site on the D&D website you were talking about, Shawn, I've literally never heard of it. And I have some surprise that, Wizards isn't doing a little bit more to shepherd that new player online experience. Instead of just kind of, like go into the sea of strangers online and see if you can't find yourself a D&D group. That's the number one thing that I think that turns people off from playing D&D online. That's what I've, from people who have done it that I've heard. I've always heard, I'm really nervous about going, interacting, playing D&D, which can sometimes be a kind of vulnerable experience with a bunch of people who I've never met, who I know basically nothing about. And so I would rather not play D&D than play it with complete strangers. And I'm like, I think
there are solutions to that, though.
That. Yeah.
But I mean, but that's another stream. But I think that one of the things I was just thinking about when Shawn was talking was that, like, I said earlier, if you're a third-party developer, the clock is ticking, because if Wizards of the Coast releases a VTT and you can't get your content on there, then your audience is going to start, it may not happen immediately, but your audience is going to start shrinking. What about game stores, right? Like what happens to game stores because the history of D&D and game stores is really interesting. I've known several shop owners who are like, the D&D books sell, right? But they have to have this space in their store for people to play D&D, and Wizards of the Coast sends them, or they used to send them, all this material for running their own games. I think they still do stuff like that. And what happens when Wizards of the Coast decides we don't need game stores anymore? We no longer need to have that, because, this is super different than like terraforming Mars, right? Like finding people to play D&D with. D&D is a weird game because it has a dungeon master that has to do all this work outside the game. That's not true of something like terraforming Mars or Codenames, right? And so they've always believed, I think correctly, that they need the game store experience so that normal people can just be like, I don't know what to do. And there'll be people there that will run it for them. And if they've got a VTT, then I think that problem largely starts to solve itself. And then at that point, what happens to game stores?
It's not. They used to have great programs like D&D Encounters for 4th edition, where they would run every Wednesday. You knew it was Wednesday. The reason that Wizards needs game stores is not for D&D; it's for Magic. Right.
Sure. Yeah. So it's actually the other way around. I think that Magic is a target, right? But game stores, like if you want to run a game store, you've got to stock. There's a certain number of games you've got to stock, otherwise you're going to go out of business. You have to have Magic the Gathering. You got to have Warhammer, and I think there's always another one, Yu-Gi-Oh or Pokemon, and it kind of changes. But I heard somewhere, and I've not verified this, but it does sound like the kind of thing that tends to happen, that they changed the laws regarding what counts as a volunteer. Right. And so all of a sudden, a lot of these organized play things where you could become like a press ganger for Privateer Press, and they would send you a shirt and they would pay you in product. And then you just went to the game store and you organized the event at the game store. I think that all changed and kind of dried up. So if that's accurate, or if it's even related, then that makes something like a VTT even more important, because people need to find a way to play the game, even if they don't know anybody. Look, how many people in this country or in the world live within 10 or 15 miles of a game store? Really few, right? So even the most robust Adventurers League program is not going to reach all those people. So that's what the VTT does.
Speaking of reaching people,
Good segue.
Yeah, no, thank you. Speaking of reaching people, Gen Con, or speaking of being in one place all at the same time, actually, Gen Con happened over the weekend. And I just quickly wanted to give a quick shout out. I don't know if you other gens know this. In fact, I may be slightly ignorant as well, but we have an ENNIE award-winning writer on this podcast at this very moment, a freshly minted ENNIE award winner in the guise of James Haeck, winning the gold ENNIE for best setting, him and the writing team for the Tal'Dorei Reborn.
Right. And congratulations, James. Also, I believe that Hannah Rose, who is currently an MCDM employee, was one of the people kind of organizing that thing. And so,
Correctamundo.
Congrats to everybody that worked on that project.
Yeah, we've sort of split the wishbone on that one. our two organizations. Yes. Oh my God! Don't make me talk about it. I'm embarrassed.
Okay, I won't make you talk about
it. No. I mean about the ENNIE. I don't know how to describe like the way I'm feeling. I'm just
Were you there? Were you there for the ceremony?
Very proud about it. No, I wish. Our producer Ivan Van Norman was.
I know Ivan. Yeah, Ivan's cool.
Ivan's a lovely fellow, and he was there to accept the awards, and I'm sure the medals will be in the U.S. Post to me and Matt and Hannah. All very soon? Did
you see? I think I saw on Twitter him just like holding his ENNIE and then plunging his hand into his pocket to pull out the fistful of medals for all the other writing team, which was a nice humble brag. Also, we won't go ahead, James.
The only thing I have to say about that is I'm overwhelmed, and that Tal'Dorei Reborn is a really, really, really good book, and you should check it out.
I won't run through the full list of winners, but I just did want to shout out Best Adventure or the Gold ENNIE for Best Adventure going to Uncaged Goddesses, which we shouted out, I think, last time we spoke about the ENNIEs. I haven't read the most recent one, but I just think Uncaged is a cool anthology series.
It is super cool.
And the other one,
when MCDM first started looking for freelancers, that's one of the places we went.
I think same here at Ghostfire.
Two Uncaged Goddesses. Yep.
Yeah, I think that we've got a lot of people that kind of cross over there that I've seen, particularly on the Fables line of writers. And then just a quick shout out, this just caught my eye, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, is Che and Peku, who I believe got the gold ENNIE for best cartography. And I just want to shout them out because I used their maps all through COVID, throwing it into a virtual tabletop, and they're beautiful and they're detailed and there's lots of variations. So if you are using virtual tabletops...
I mean, I set the point now where you probably, if you need their maps, you probably already know about them. But I ran an entire 4th edition campaign last year and into this year called Dusk. And most of it was literally me just looking at Zay and Peku's maps and going like, that'd be cool. Which, by the way, that's not normally how I run D&D. It was very refreshing for me. I was running on a VTT on purpose so that I could play with people that don't live around here, like Dale Kingsmill. And so for me, since I was in a VTT anyway, I started with the map. Like, I designed an adventure that on purpose, I was not going to know from one week to the other what was going to happen. And it was purely just down to, oh, that's a cool map. And it gave me an idea for an encounter, and that became the next session. And I'd have a session that would take me, like 2 or 3 hours to prep a session that way. It was super, super good. So, and it's mostly because of those maps.
Yeah. Just for the the Twitch chat, it is CZE PEKU. I'm not logged in on Twitch to be able to type it out into that chat.
It just occurred to me that it should be like Che or Che, because isn't it the same spelling as Czechoslovakia? Isn't it the CZE? So that's the best I can do trying to figure out how you pronounce it.
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. I went with Che, you went with Z. One of us would have got it right, I'm sure.
Some of those syllables are probably in the real thing. So between the two of us, we probably got it covered.
Those are the best D&D cartographers, best TTRPG cartographers that I will never ever be able to hire, because they are so successful on their Patreon.
Yep.
They are raking it in, and for very good reason. They do not need to work freelance, and I'm very happy.
I mean, by the way, that's a problem. That's a real problem that MCDM runs into, is that there are some remarkable artists that we would love to work with, but they don't need anybody anymore because they have Patreons, right? And it's like, oh, well, good for you. Awesome. That makes me happy. There's Mike Franchina, who did a bunch of art design for us. That guy just did his own Kickstarter, might even still be live right now. And it's like those between Kickstarters and Patreons, I have friends of mine who are artists in video games. They're sculptors, right? And they're looking at they could just sculpt their own stuff, 3D print it, and that's their Patreon or that's their Kickstarter. And that's a huge shift in the power structure of how games get developed, and I think a good one, because I'm all power to the people.
Token makers, map makers, other virtual tabletops that kind of sprung up or were established, but kind of really got themselves going during COVID. A lot of that was really exciting and really changed the way, I agree with you, Matt, the way that I was running D&D, which was to find a big dungeon map that one of these map makers had created and basically plan the dungeon out through that and drag the tokens through almost like it was an interactive video game, as opposed to the typical experience of describing everything in a tabletop RPG, to the point where I was like hiding things on the, like physical tokens on the map that would be like, you find this book and here it is. And
it's super cool. Like I don't want to pimp one VTT over the other, but having now run on a VTT that does stuff like has different vision for different correctly implemented rules for things like vision and fog of war and stuff like that. When the person in the party that had the torch walked away, and my friend Matt O'Driscoll's map suddenly went completely black, and all he had was his little token floating in the void, and we heard him going, ah, like that. That was, and then the same thing happened to Dale. Somebody blinded her character, and the whole map went dark, and she was like, it was super, super immersive, and it's so good. Like my experience using a VTT for the automation, specifically the fact that I can literally get up and go get a slice of pizza in the microwave when it's your turn. And then I can come back and be like, what happened? You're like, well, I attacked this goblin and did this damage and they died. I'm like, cool. I didn't need to do anything. Right. Yeah. The VTT knew how many hit points they had, knew that you hit, knew the armor class, knew your bonus. And so that is so strong that's how the Chain of Acheron, when the Chain of Acheron comes back, that's how it's going to be, but it's going to be at the table. We're live at the table. We're going to have people are going to have monitors set up and the computers off screen somewhere, and everyone's going to be, so we're going to be in person. We'll be able to see each other face to face, but we'll be running the game using the VTT. The best of all possible worlds is the idea.
Yeah.
Here, I thought you were going to say when somebody gets blinded, you'll blindfold them.
I'm just going to blind them. No, I'm not going to blindfold them. No.
That's what the dagger's for.
Stab their eyeballs out and be like, here you go. And then when somebody heals them, I'm going to be like, now what?
Good luck,
Can I put these back in? I'm sure they'll heal up. They'll just regenerate, right?
That's how the real world works. Speaking of things regenerating, this podcast is going to next week when we return. But that is the episode for this week. If you want to email, ask questions for the panel, you can hit podcast@ghostfiregaming.com, and I will take those emails and read them out, much as I did Dave's at the start of the episode for the panel to discuss. If you are on our YouTube channel, please do subscribe and hit that bell icon so that this new channel can grow. The Eldritch Lorecast has outgrown the Ghostfire Gaming channel on its own. And if you're listening to this on audio platforms, rate, all that good stuff. Let people know. Get out like a bard yourself and sing the praises of the Lorecast from your local tavern to help grow our community. Thank you so much, Matt Colville, for joining us and on relatively short notice as well.
Thank you for having me on. I am a poor substitute for Dale Kingsmill, but I did my best.
Thank you, mate.
My name is Ben Byrne. I've been here with Shawn Merwin, James Haeck, Matt Colville. Dale Kingsmill will be back next week. And until then, we will see you later.
Peace out.
Bye-bye.